Hi class, hope everyone's having a wonderful day so far. I want to start off by saying how proud I am of each of you for sticking to it through distance learning and for turning into another asynchronous lesson. You've all shown tremendous growth as students and people throughout the pandemic, and you should all be very proud of what you've accomplished so far. So let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about similes and metaphors. So what do you think a simile is? What do you think a metaphor is? Take out a piece of paper and write down what you think both of those things mean. If it's just a guess, that's okay, it's perfect. I want to see what you all think in terms of what a simile and a metaphor actually mean. Okay, now that you've taken some time to write down what you think the definitions of simile and metaphor are, I'm going to show you the basic definitions for both of them, and then we're going to watch a little video. So I bet some of you probably wrote down that a simile seems a lot like smile, and that's true. They are similar words, but they have very different meanings. Similes can make you smile, but that's not exactly what a simile is. Some of you also probably wrote down things like a comparison or a way to describe something, and those are definitely on the right track. But if you didn't get the answer right, don't worry. I'm going to explain what it is now a little bit so you can have a simple idea of what it means before we watch our video. So basically, similes are comparisons between two things that use like or as. And then for metaphors, I bet a lot of you had a little more trouble coming up with a definition or guess for what it means because they're a little trickier. It took me a long time to understand them when I was your age, so it's definitely okay if it takes you a little while now too. Here's the simple definition. Metaphors are comparisons between two things that don't use like or as, and the two things are not very similar. The easiest way to tell whether a figure of speech is a simile or metaphor is by looking for words like or as. If it's a comparison that uses like or as, it's most likely a simile. But if it doesn't use like or as and it's a comparison, it's probably going to be a metaphor. So here's a link that I want you all to copy and open up. And you're just going to play it from YouTube. And I want you all to write down what you think the similes and metaphors are during the video. It's really short, so pause this lecture and go watch that video, write down the similes and metaphors, and then resume this video when you're done with that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Now, I hope you recognize at least some of the similes and metaphors in it. How many did you count? I counted 6 similes and 4 metaphors, and they're all listed on this slide. And it's totally okay if you guys didn't get all of them on the first try because you're just starting to learn what similes and metaphors are. You can always watch the video again and see if you can find all of the other ones that you may have missed. But now we're going to get ready to go into a little bit more detailed definition of what similes and metaphors are. So a simile is a figure of speech that compares two unlike things, two things that are different from each other. That is often done by using words like or as. And some common examples that you've probably seen: busy as a bee, light as a feather, sleep like a baby, sweet like sugar. Can you think of any similes that you've heard? If you can, write them down on your sheet of paper that you had from the beginning of class. And one way to think about similes is that a simile sounds like similar. And so when things have something in common, they're like each other. And if you're comparing something, that means that they have something in common, even if the two things are different. And now here's some examples from books that you guys may have read that have similes in them. Let's see if you can pick out the similes in these passages. Summertime is important. It's like a shaft of sunlight from Stuart Little. So here the simile is saying that summertime is like a shaft of sunlight. Do you see how that comparison works? The author is comparing the importance of summer to the importance of sunlight, using the word like to connect them. And then on to the next one. Up she went like a jack in the box, and she didn't come down. That's from George's Marvelous Medicine. Hopefully that one's a little bit easier to recognize. The simile is up she went like a jack in the box. The author is comparing the girl to a jack in the box by the way she shot up in the air, using like to compare them. Just like the way that a jack in the box pops up, the woman popped up in the air. And then I don't know if any of you have read A Series of Unfortunate Events or heard of it, but this next example is from The Bad Beginning. It's a curious thing, the death of a loved one. We all know that our time in this world is limited and that eventually all of us will end up underneath some sheet, never to wake up. And yet it is always a surprise when it happens to someone we know. It is like walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark and thinking that there is one more stair than there is. So here the simile is, it is like walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark and thinking there's one more stair than there is. This one might have been a little tougher to find because the two comparing things are at the beginning and the end of the passage. But don't worry, it'll get easier to identify those. But definitely in this one, Lemony Snicket's comparing the death of a loved one to walking up the stairs to your bedroom in the dark and thinking there's one more stair than there is. I don't know if any of you've ever felt that feeling before where you're walking upstairs in the dark and you think that there's one more stair and you step up and really there's not one and you feel like you're falling. And this is kind of saying that experiencing the death of a loved one is like tripping on that last step or feeling like you're falling on that last step. And now to go into metaphors. Metaphors are figures of speech that compare two unlike things by using one thing to refer to another without using like or as. A metaphor describes something in a way that isn't literally true, but helps make a comparison by saying that one thing has something in common with another. And so some common examples of those: life is a highway, music to my ears, you're an angel, he's a couch potato. And if you can think of any examples of metaphors that you've heard, can you write them down on your sheet of paper from earlier? And here's a couple examples of metaphors from books. So in Wonder, the passage is, Mom had Via 4 years before, and that had been such a walk in the park, Mom's expression, that there was no reason to run any special tests. So the two things being compared here are a walk in the park and parenting Via. And have any of you heard the phrase, that was a walk in the park? It's typically thought of as really easygoing and light. And so using this metaphor was the author's way of saying that Mom having Via and parenting Via was very easy. And then another example from James and the Giant Peach. The crowds of people who were climbing up the hill suddenly caught sight of the peach, a terrible monster, plunging down upon them. And so the peach is being compared to a terrible monster. It's not literally a monster, but in the book, the peach was really large and scary and had monster-like qualities. So calling it a terrible monster was an example of a metaphor because it's comparing it to a monster. So now I'm going to walk you through how to find similes in passages. So to start, a giant of a man was standing in the doorway. His face was almost completely hidden by a long, shaggy mane of hair and a wild, tangled beard, but you could make out his eyes glinting like black beetles under all the hair. So where do you think the simile is? It's in his eyes glinting like black beetles. And how do we know that that's a simile? Well, it's the only part of the passage that makes a comparison using like or as. The first part of the paragraph is actually a metaphor, but comparing the man's eyes to black beetles was actually a simile. Now let's try a longer example. Pause the video now and read this to yourself. read it twice or 3 times if you need to, and try to pick out the similes in there. There should be a total of 2 similes that you can find in there. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to identify the 2 similes in here. So the first one was his hair was long and tangled and greasy and hung down, and you could see his eyes shining through like he was behind vines. The simile there is like he was behind vines. And then the other one, his hat was laying on the floor, an old black slouch with the top caved in like a lid. And how do we know that these are similes? Because they both use like to compare 2 things. If you were able to find even one of them, great job. You're definitely learning how to identify similes. But if you couldn't find one, don't worry. We're going to keep learning together so we can get better as a class. And you're going to practice this a little bit more on your own as well. Now we're going to learn how to find metaphors in passages. So this one's really short, trying to keep it pretty simple for you. Billy was a warrior when he was training his dogs. The metaphor here, an easy way to do that, to find it, is to look for a comparison between 2 things that aren't very similar. So in this passage, the metaphor was Billy was a warrior. And how do we know this was a metaphor? When the author says that Billy was a warrior, did he actually mean that Billy put on his armor and carried a sword into battle to go fight an enemy? No, that's not what he meant. What he meant with this metaphor was that Billy was relentless. So he tried really, really hard and didn't give up on his dogs when he was training them. And he was ready for any of the challenges that could occur while he was training his dogs. And the author could have said that Billy was like a warrior, and that would have been a simile. But instead, he chose to use a metaphor to make that comparison even more realistic. And now here's an even longer example of a metaphor. I want you to pause this video again and try to pick out the metaphor. There should be only one, but it's a little bit trickier to find. So read the passage a couple times and try to figure out which one it is. And then play this video again when you're ready. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you were able to at least attempt to find the metaphor, but don't worry if you couldn't find it, because I'm going to walk you through how to look for it right now. So the metaphor in this passage was, even when their own child is the most disgusting little blister you could ever imagine. How do we know that this is a metaphor? Did the author really mean that the child was a blister, like the little things you get on your hands sometimes when you climb on the monkey bars for too long at recess? No, that's not what he meant. Blisters, though, are annoying and gross and difficult to manage. And so the author here is comparing the child to a blister and trying to say that the child was annoying and difficult to manage and sometimes a little gross. And calling him a blister does that really, really well. And now we're going to do a little activity. We're going to try to write some of our own similes and metaphors. So, steps to writing your own simile. Step 1, pick a topic. I think a lot of you like sports in this class, so let's pick sports as our topic. Step 2 is to narrow down your topic and pick 2 things to compare. So in sports, it's a really good thing to be fast or strong. So we're going to use those as part of our comparisons. Step 3, write the simile. So you pick fast, you pick a thing that's fast. So the one that I came up with for that was, she was as fast as a cheetah, so she won the race. And then for strength, you want to think of something really strong. So he was strong like an ox, so everyone wanted him on the football team. Hopefully that makes sense. And now here's the steps to writing your own metaphor. Step 1, pick a topic. We're going to stay with the topic of sports. Step 2, again, narrow down your topic to pick 2 things to compare. And we're going to narrow it down to basketball, because I've heard a few of you enjoy playing basketball. I love basketball, so we're gonna do that. Step 3 is write the metaphor. He's a machine. How does he make every shot in basketball? That project was a slam dunk. So when you say he's a machine, does that mean the person shooting the ball is actually a machine, like he's a robot? No, it doesn't. But it means that the person shooting is like perfect or doing things really, really well, like surprisingly well, so that it's almost like they're a robot programmed to make every shot. And then that project was a slam dunk. Was the project really a slam dunk? Like, did you go and dunk the project in the basketball hoop? I don't think so, but slam dunks are really cool. They're awesome and they get a lot of applause and energy. And so when you say that that project was a slam dunk, what you're saying is that it was a really good project. So here's a little learning check that I want to have you all do for before next class. I want you to pick 3 different topics, different from the ones that we used in class, and write 2 poems for each topic. So one poem is going to use a simile and one is going to use a metaphor for each topic. So you're going to write 6 poems total, 2 per topic, one using simile and one using metaphor. Try to spend a lot of time planning out what metaphors and similes you might want to use and what topics interest you so that your poems can be really meaningful to you when you write them. I want this to be something enjoyable for you guys, not something that you just have to do to turn in to get points. I want you to actually learn something from it and have fun doing it by relating it a lot to your lives. And this is going to be due next Friday, December 10th. Thank you guys so much for sticking to it and tuning into another asynchronous lesson. Can't wait to give you another video lesson next week. Bye, everybody.